Good morning, everyone, and welcome to biology class. So, today we'll be discussing tissue and supporting system. Tissue and supporting system. So, prior to this class, we've looked at digestion, how food is broken down into a simpler form or in simpler particles, and how excretion, how the same food or the materials that are broken down in the body of an organism leaves the body of an organism. So generally, we are talking about the entirety or the body of a living organism. So in this topic now, living organism in this context rather are either plants or animal, right? Living organism can either be plants, or living thing rather can either be plants or animals, right? So when we are talking about tissues and supporting tissue, before we talk about the word tissue in level of organization, the first thing that comes into place is the cell. Cell, tissue, organ, and system in that hierarchy, right? So if you're talking about tissue now, we're talking about tissues that comprise of various cells, right? And how they, comes together to form a supporting tissue or a living organism. Every living thing need tissue to carry out a life processes. That simply means for a living organism, be it plant or animal, most especially animals, for them to stand, for them to breathe, for them to move or migrate from one place to another, locomote, they need tissue. There's a need for tissue. Organisms like vertebrate or vertebrata are organisms that has backbones, right? For them to carry out life processes such as locomotion, such as respiration, right? There's a need for the presence of a tissue in them, right? So tissue enables living organisms to carry out life processes. And life processes in this context deals with locomotion, deals with even reproduction, because we have a pelvic bone that enables the process or the procedure, right? So this is what we'll be discussing today. Then we'll move to the subtopic, which is a skeleton. Skeleton. What is skeleton? We are talking about tissue and we are talking about supporting tissue, right? Then we're talking about skeleton. Now, what is a skeleton? A skeleton can be defined as a bony framework. It's a bony framework. Not just a bony framework that gives support, rigidity, and protection against the internal organ of an organism. So it's a bony framework that protects, that supports, and protects living organism. So skeleton don't just give support and protection also. Don't just give support and protection alone. They enable, they give shape to an organism. Without skeleton, a living organism will not be able to stand erect or will not function maximally. So skeleton, right, is a bony framework that supports and protects living organisms. By the word protection, which simply means that it protects vital organs, important organs in the body of a living organism. So protection, now we're talking about what? Vital organs. So vital organs are protected from damage as a result of due to the presence of what of a skeleton. So skeleton can be defined as a bony framework that gives support, that protects living organisms, internal organ from damage. So it gives rigidity also. It gives enable a living organism to stand erect effectively. So let's now look at the components of a skeleton. Components of skeleton. Components and form of skeleton. There are three components or forms of skeleton. Number one is cuticle. Number two is bone. And number three is cartilage. The components and forms of skeleton are divided into three. One, we have the cuticle. Two, we have the bone. And three, we have the cartilage. Now let's start with the cuticle. What is a cuticle? Cuticle is a component of skeleton that is found in the body of a living organisms like your prawn, like your insects, right? So it's a form of skeleton. Now it contains what is called chitin. Some call it chitin, some can also pronounce it as chitin. This chitin is a protein in nature. It's protein. It's also a non-living material. Protein and non-living. And non-living materials. It doesn't just contain chitin alone. It also contains a thin waterproof wax. So it contains chitin and a thin waterproof wax, more like, a waterproof protection that protects it against, damage or against water, against being submerged in water and whatnot. So this is what cuticle contains. This is what cuticle contains, or these are the components of cuticle. It contains chitin and it contains protein. I said chitin in this context are non-living materials that are found in cuticle. So organisms that exhibit this can only grow through molting or ecdysis. So organisms like your insects, like your prawn, like your snakes also can only grow or increase in size or body mass through what is known as ecdysis. Ecdysis, or call it molting. Now, what is ecdysis or molting? Ecdysis or molting is the process by which living organisms shed off or remove their old flesh to enable growth in such an organism. The process through which living organisms, such as your insects, such as your prawn, remove old skins so that growth may occur in them. That is what ecdysis or molting is all about. This takes place in an organism that has cuticle, because cuticle is a non-living material. It's a non-living material that is found in the body of this organism. So that is just it. Then we have a thin waterproof layer. The combination of cuticle and a thin waterproof layer of waterproof of wax, right, enables them to easily shed off their old skin. I don't know how many of you, had in your houses, you will have seen insects that you see, like spider, you see an old body of spider. By the time you touch them, you realize there's nothing inside. This simply means that they've undergone ecdysis or molting, removing or shedding off their old skin, right, and to enable growth. Because if those old skins are not shed off or are not removed, they will not be able to grow. And for living organisms to undergo life processes, growth needs to occur, which is irreversible increase in size and weight of an organism due to the building of new protoplasms. What are these protoplasms? They are the living contents that are found in the cell. So the next thing we look out for is the bone. The bone is a living tissue. For bone is a living tissue that contains what is called osteocytes. Bone contains three materials. One, it contains the osteocyte. It contains what is called protein fiber. This protein fiber is called collagen. It also contains minerals. And this mineral is mineral salt, which is calcium carbonate and calcium sulfate. So these are the three materials that the bone contains. The bone contains the osteocyte. Osteocytes, whenever you hear the word osteo means bone. That's why we see in children, they say they have a soft bone, osteoporosis, that's having a pore like a hole in the bone. And when I see the word osteo means bone, literally. So osteocyte is generally a material that is responsible for transmitting essential material in the bone. It's a site that is responsible for transmitting essential materials in the bone. So the bone contains the osteocyte, it contains protein fiber called the collagen, and it contains minerals, which is calcium carbonate and calcium sulfate. Whenever you hear the word calcium, they are responsible for strengthening of bone. At the same time, they also take part in the process of blood clotting. By the time we discuss extensively on transport system, of circulatory system, and we'll talk about the process of blood clotting, you understand where the calcium comes into place. So these are the essential contents or components that the bone contains. Remember that the bone is a living tissue. So it contains both living tissues and non-living tissues. So for bone, they contain living tissues and non-living materials. So it contains living materials because it's a living tissue, and it also contains what? A non-living materials. That is it for the bone. So for the bone, let's assume the bone looks like this. The outer part of the bone, which is much more stronger and much more tough, is known as the shaft. The shaft. Well, of course, the internal part of the bone, we all know it's referred to as what? As the marrow. And the marrow, or the bone marrow, is responsible for blood production. Remember that blood is not produced in the heart. Blood is produced in the bone marrow. However, the heart is responsible for pumping or circulating blood around the body during systemic circulatory system. Right? So those are the differences. That's the difference between the marrow and the heart. So these are the materials that are found in the bone. The next thing we'll look out for is the cartilage. The cartilage. As opposed to the bone that contains as a living tissue and contains both living materials and non-living materials. For cartilage, the cartilage is a living tissue and contains extensively living material. So it's a living tissue. So the cartilage is a living tissues, contain purely living materials. And for it, it contains three other components, which are one, we have the chondroblast. So it contains the chondroblast. That's for the tissue. It contains carbohydrate. Also contains protein. So these are the three essential materials. Take note, chondroblast. The chondroblast. So these materials that are found in the cartilage enables the tensile strength, because the cartilage serves as a shock absorber. It prevents friction. It prevents the wearing and tearing of bone. It's literally found in between short disc of bones or small bone, in between two bones, right? So it prevents two bones from touching each other. Because if two bones touches each other, right, it will lead to the wearing and tearing of the bone. So primarily, the cartilage prevents two bones from touching each other and prevents the wearing and tearing of bones, prevents friction amongst two bones. So you have a high tensile strength. It is flexible at the same time. It is, it serves as protection to the bone. This is the primary function of the cartilage. Now, we now look at the difference between bone and cartilage. We look at the differences. And let's look at the differences Is this better? Yes. So let's look at the differences between bones and cartilage. When I was explaining bone and cartilage, I made mention that bone is very strong and is very rigid. So for bone, we say bone is very strong and, let me use the word rigid or tough. So for cartilage is very flexible. So it's not rigid. Cartilage is not rigid and it's not as tough as bone. That's one. Two, bone contains living materials and non-living materials, or living cells and non-living cells. So for bone contains living cells. So I'm going to clean this off. Living cells and non-living cells. But for cartilage, it contains purely living cells. Another difference between bones and cartilage is bones cannot be replaced by cartilage. Take, for example, in an adult, if you have a bone fracture, your bone, if you are doing a bone replacement, bone must be replaced during surgery with a bone. Bone cannot be replaced with a cartilage. However, cartilage can be replaced with bone. So bones cannot be replaced. While cartilage can be replaced with bones. Let's look at another difference again. Another difference is bone is not flexible. Bone is not flexible. Yes, it's not flexible. For cartilage, cartilage is flexible. Cartilage is flexible. So these are literally the major differences between bones and cartilage. The major differences between bones and cartilage. For bone is very strong, it's very rigid, and it's very tough. You can break it and you can break it like a 3-point. So it's very strong, it's very rigid, it's very tough. Whereas for cartilage is not tough, it's not rigid, and of course, it's not as strong as cartilage. It serves as a shock absorber. That's literally what it does. It has a high strength, tensile strength that prevents two bones from touching each other. Because if two bones start touching each other, then there's a problem. Remember, in one of the classes I took, I said there's what we call a synovial fluid. Synovial fluid is found in between these two bones, right, that bring about the cushioning and prevent the two bones from touching each other. However, in between those synovial fluids and the bone, there's a presence of cartilage. So the cartilage ensures that two bones don't touch each other. So it's not flexible. So for bones also, bone contains living cell and non-living cell. They contain living cell and non-living cell. However, in cartilage, it's purely living cell. Bones cannot be replaced by cartilage. Should in case of surgery or any accident, bone cannot be replaced by cartilage. However, cartilage can be replaced with bone. That's the differences. Another one is bones are not flexible. Bones generally are not flexible. However, cartilage is very flexible. So those are literally the difference between cartilage and bone. So before we proceed, cartilage is also divided into 3. We have 3 types of cartilage. One, we have hyaline. 2, we have the fibro. And 3, we have the elastic cartilage. So we have hyaline, the fibro, and the elastic cartilage. Should I increase it? Okay. So these are the 3 types of cartilage that we have. So for hyaline cartilage is found at the bronchioles. It's kind of cartilage is found at the bronchioles. That's where it is found, the bronchioles. That's where you find mostly this cartilage. It can also be found close to the esophagus. That's where you find the hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage can also be found at the protruding part of your nose. The protruding part of your nose. So, the bronchiole or the bronchiole And the protruding